Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Maria Brown Spence. I'm program manager here at the Entrepreneurs Foundation. And at the Entrepreneurs Foundation, we promote philanthropy and community engagement while helping entrepreneurs build corporate cultures that contribute to their business success. For those that are just entering, again, this is Culturati Live. My name is Maria Brown Spence, program manager for the Entrepreneurs Foundation. At this time, I would love to bring on my colleague, Sophia Javaheri.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sophia Javaheri. I am the Entrepreneurs Foundation manager of Culturati. Culturati is a community of leaders who practice and study culture building and share our playbooks. In the past, we've always said it's a community of C-suite leaders and executives, but we're expanding to include directors, managers, and all who care about culture building. We host candid conversations around the country in addition to an annual summit. We commission research and publish thought leadership, including the Culture Book, which we published in 2019, which I'm going to link in the chat later. Today, we're bringing you a conversation about allyship, advocacy, and action. We appreciate you all for joining us, especially so close to year end. I know how busy we all are. So thank you and enjoy the conversation. Now back to Maria.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Yes, I am excited for this discussion, being that these are themes that we saw take place in 2020. Everyone saw these themes and could not help but have some sort of action or take initiative in whatever their industry or field was. So to begin the conversation, I just wanted to give you a couple definitions on allyship, advocacy, and action that really stood out to me and really resonated with the panelists that you have here today. These are amazing change makers, thought leaders in the community that are really actively engaged with making change. So allyship. Allyship is the practice of emphasizing social justice, inclusion, and human rights by members of an in-group to advance the interests of an oppressed or more marginalized outgroup. Advocacy is defined as an action that speaks in favor of, recommends, argues for a cause, supports or defends or pleads on behalf of others. Action, a thing done, a deed, the accomplishment of a thing, usually over a period of time in stages or with a possibility of repetition. As we all know, and working with a lot of entrepreneurs, it takes a lot of repetition to really get anything done. So we know that no matter what change we're driving towards, what business or organization we're building, we know that it's going to take time. Nothing changes overnight, but conversations like these are a starting point. So enough about me. Let's get started, and I'd love to introduce the panelists. We have Talis, Apud Martinez, Paulette Blanc, and Janice Omadeke. At this time, I would love for our panelists to give a brief introduction of themselves, their little elevator pitch. Again, we are in a room full of entrepreneurs and we know how important that is in the business world. So I'll start with you, Talis.
Thank you, Maria, and hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for including me and crew in this conversation. And yeah, a little about me. I grew up in a small town in Mexico, and I am now here in Austin, Texas. I went to school here at UT, and I'm now the co-founder and executive director of a tech nonprofit called Crew 2030, and we make online tools for movements, right? Our platform is called Crew Platform, and it allows organizations to train, support, and connect volunteer members, parents, students, whatever it is, the type of community that organizations are mobilizing. We're kind of that online tool that allows the movement to work on the mission that they are focusing on.
Thank you so much, Talis. Now to Ms. Paulette Blanc.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. So excited to be here with you all. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. My name is Paulette Blanc, and I serve as Chief of Research for Measure. Outside of that, I'm also a policy analyst for Texas Medical Association. My background and formal training is back in Florida in public health. That's kind of like where I got started with data and wanting to just understand how that relates to population health. And fast forward now, I'm here with Measure, being able to use data and education to mobilize communities to be able to eliminate social disparities. That is our vision and our mission, to be able to have a society that is doesn't have any inequities. And we do a lot of this by being able to provide data and evaluation support for local Black and Brown-led nonprofits. There definitely is a lot of room in the philanthropic space to have more funding opportunities for community members who are serving their community, who understand their experiences, and are providing these services through their nonprofit organizations. And so in a nutshell, that's kind of what Measure is about, being able to use data and education in that space.
Thank you so much, Paulette. Janice Omadeke, you're next.
Good afternoon. I'm Janice Omadeke. I'm CEO and founder of the Mentor Method. Our enterprise SaaS platform helps companies build inclusive mentorship programs in under an hour. We work with some of the largest companies in the world, including leading social media tech companies and management consulting firms. They come to us because of our inclusive focus on employee engagement and pipeline development. Because of how impactful our technology solution is, we've been featured in publications including Entrepreneur Magazine, Forbes, and the Austin Business Journal. Per Maria's definition, allyship is connected to supporting fundamental human rights. Everybody should have the same access to opportunities regardless of their background, race, or gender identities. So I'm greatly looking forward to discussing allyship and equity for all today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. So let's just dive in. And again, each person that was selected for this panel was slotted into a word that I felt resonated with the work they do and just who they are in general. Janice, as she mentioned in her elevator pitch, allyship. Paulette, advocacy, really doing the work and educating the people on an issue. And Talis, the platform, it really gets people to move towards action. And so for me, there couldn't have been a better selection to have these panelists defined under those. So out of the three words, allyship, advocacy, and action, how does your industry and or organization work towards improving social impact? And I know you've given us a bit of your organization and the work you do, but I'd really like to hear about maybe a specific project or how you even got started in that space with your organization. All right, so we'll give that just a second. My colleague here, Sophia, says that 50% have answered. Welcome to the virtual space of where we're communicating through chat. Sophia, are you able to give me what the top number, what the top cause was so far? All right, here we are. So 45% said allyship resonated with their involvement, 25% said advocacy, and 30% said action. So based on that poll that we had, let's rewind, take a step back, and I'd like to ask the question, how did you get involved this year in 2020, either with allyship, advocacy, or action? Would you like to start, Janice?
Happy to. Well, the basis of the Mentor Method is focused on making sure that historically excluded professionals are connected to mentors. If you look at the landscape of the number of executives and leadership positions, there's a disproportionate number of those in the majority in leadership positions as compared to those in more of the execution roles that are where typically our historically excluded professionals peak, right? So if we were to match people based on just age, race, gender identity, we would have a limited pool within those corporations that come to the Mentor Method. So we've expanded our focus to make sure that we're chemistry-based first, so that underrepresented professionals are matched to mentors regardless of the external parameters. That naturally builds a system of allyship and inclusion, where employees are given these advocates who can open doors, show pages of their playbooks, broaden their network, and provide promotional opportunities. So we've been focusing a lot in that space in terms of making sure that we're working with employee resource groups, but corporations overall, in how are they looking at mentorship as one of the key components to building an inclusive culture where allyship is a cornerstone of that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Janice.
I can chime in a bit about just advocacy and that word for measure. We use data to expose a lot of the inequities, and we also use it as a means for accountability to be able to measure the outcomes that we're trying to affect, and the institutions that serve the community have those metrics to hold them accountable. And we also use it to elevate the lived experiences of the people who are most impacted by historical and systemic inequities, being able to have their voices at the table when solutions are being created, because we believe that they're experts in their experiences and thus makes them qualified to come up with solutions as well. So our advocacy looks like, as I mentioned before, providing that data support and data evaluation for Black and Brown-led nonprofits so that they can improve their services to the communities that they serve and to be able to get funding for their work as well. Our advocacy also looks like protecting Black girls from adultification bias, and we do this through our Innocence Initiative. And for those of you who may not know what adultification bias is, it's the perception that Black girls are less innocent or more adult-like than their peers, and thus they get harsher treatment within school systems, harsher disciplinary actions, and often are funneled earlier on into the criminal justice system. And so that Innocence Initiative is like a multi-pronged approach to really tackling this issue. And our advocacy also looks like creating a community engaged research course. So we know that data is a powerful tool. It shapes our laws, policies, healthcare, and so many other things. And so being able to create this research course that teaches Black and Brown researchers, it really develops them in a way that they can take on research methods and data analysis in an anti-bias framework. So those are just some of the ways we're advocating for the community, and also just providing our data support as well. So.
Cool, I'll go with action. I think for us at Crew, we actually, all of our staff at Crew, we all have a background in youth movements. I personally work in helping build youth movements since I was really young, but then especially here when I came to the States, and I was in college, one of my good friends and I started a nonprofit called Feel Good. And we were really inspired by the work of an organization back then called the Hunger Project that does work internationally to help eradicate poverty, extreme poverty in different countries around the world. And one of the main ways in which they inspired us is in always asking the question, what is missing? Which for us, then through the years, we turned into what is needed. When we're really, really passionate about an issue in society, I think every human has, we all have an issue or a series of issues that just really, really connect with the deepest part of our soul. I feel like that we're here to make a contribution towards something, and in a way, like all of our passions and like feelings of making a contribution towards an issue complement each other, right? So it's like we're all needed in our participation to help solve society's greatest issues. And in asking this question of what is needed, I think it's, for us, we've learned to ask it within the context of what is needed to help serve this mission that I'm feeling called to, given where I'm at and what resources are available to me. And with that question has guided all of the different initiatives that we've started, because we've worked together as a group of friends for almost 20 years now. And we've gone from answering that question of what's needed first when we created Feel Good to help raise money for organizations that were doing this transformational work we were so passionate about. And then in the middle of that work, as Feel Good started to grow into dozens of colleges, then we realized actually now we see another need, which is like, now we need to be more effective at connecting students and facilitating trainings and raising money so these young students also learn how to become entrepreneurs and leaders on campus. So at that time we started working, we built a few iterations of what Crew is now, that was at first just focused on this community of young people. And then very, very quickly, as we were in the middle of this series of prototyping sessions, we realized it is a terrible idea for one organization as small as Feel Good to raise money just to serve a movement of this size. And we realized, like, actually we are in a, we know so many other folks and organizations that are doing similar work, that are organized very similarly in that typical grassroots, model where you have a tiny staff and a ton of organizers, and then who are serving and mobilizing an even greater base of volunteers, right? So we kind of got together as a community and built what now is Crew, and fundraised for building this online platform that helps facilitate action, that helps facilitate communities organizing to do work locally, and that facilitates movement builders at the, at the organizing level to support, equip, connect all of these regional organizers and local leaders to fulfill their mission. So that's a little bit of our background, and that how that question of what is needed has continued to guide what the action is, what the response is to the issues and the circumstances that we see around us.
That's great. I really like how you said using the resources that you have available. I think sometimes, I know in my head, sometimes it's like, I have to have all the resources and all the tools to do something. And you don't. You just have to really hone in on your values, your skills, and your assets to make action. I think anyone can move towards that. And you really started the conversation or answered the question, which was leading to my next question of how you got involved into this, in this space, doing this work. And you said yours even started way back when, working with youth organizing. And I think that's so important too, to even give people an insight of how you got into this space, because others might be on the same path or maybe even looking to pivot into another path. So I'd like to ask you, Paulette, how did you get into the space of doing this data work and really moving into advocacy with a nonprofit? I know data is important to the tech space. We know Austin is a big tech capital, and especially wanting to get more Black and Brown individuals into the data world. How did you get into this space, or what's your experience with that?
Yeah, so my involvement actually came out of a place of frustration and just, yeah, being frustrated with what I was seeing happening within the country, especially with racial inequities and all of those experiences because of racism, systemic racism, just experiencing that, feeling a level of frustration. While already, a little bit early on in my career in public health, doing a lot of data work, talking about social determinants of health, realizing that a lot of the societal structures facilitate or play into our health outcomes, but not really having an avenue for it until I actually met with Mimi, the president and founder of Measure, that talked about using data for social justice. And that kind of just like lit up in my head, like I can definitely get on board with this. I can see, I've already been using this in a space, but more in a population health sense, but now I'm tying it into like expanding that role and really addressing a lot of the societal structures and institutions that play into how our societies are structured, the systemic racism that's built within it, and really being able to address that. So it was more so me channeling that frustration and channeling that energy into some action that I can take and advocate, and also just use my data background and my data skills to create visuals, to create reports that could then be used to advocate for policy changes, to be able to support the experiences that community members were having. I know that like one of the early on projects that I got involved with was related to the school system. And granted, I didn't have, a background in working education, but I can definitely relate to it, looking at the data and seeing that in this one school system, Black and Brown kids were 3.5 times more likely to get charged with assault. I can't even just imagine being in middle school, being charged with assault. That just like takes your life on a whole different path. So being able to use that data and people could come around it, it was in a way that was really simplified. That's, I think, one thing that Measure just did really well, is taking data sometimes in the research space or academia where I came from. There's like these huge reports, and often you don't even have access to it because it's in this peer-reviewed journal and you need a membership. But we were definitely like just like breaking through those silos and saying, hey, like people need these tools to be able to advocate for themselves. they already have the power, and these tools can help elevate that. And so that's essentially how I got started into jumping into the space, and now being a part of Measure, and so honored to serve as their chief of research.
And you used your resources and knowledge of the data space to really move towards action in your advocacy. You see what I did there, guys? Tweet that. No, but I think that's, you know, something that we've seen just with this pandemic too, is that a lot of people are frustrated with whatever causes or issues are important to them, and they're not ready to they're not wanting to just sit back anymore. They're ready to take some sort of change to move the nation forward. So what about you, Janice? How did you get into this space or even developing the mentor method tool?
Sure. So I call myself an accidental entrepreneur in that my background is in graphic design and development. Coming from the DC metro area, I've worked in predominantly defense contracting and then management consulting. So I had studied entrepreneurship from MIT and strategic management from Harvard to help me sort of expand my opportunities within those industries as a creative. But I found that as I kept moving up and was rapidly getting promoted, it was still a challenge for me to break through the old boys club to get that same equity to access to those opportunities. So if there was a promotion available, I would have to fight 5 times as hard as my majority counterparts, just to be put in the room and in the running for those opportunities. Now I'm resilient. You know, I've been a high performer for the duration of my career, but I recognized in the teams I was a part of or my community that there were people equally as intelligent, equally as bright, but maybe didn't have that same level of tenacity. And I knew that with the right mentor, the right ally and advocate, they would be able to go light years beyond where they are previously in their careers. And so I just couldn't sit and watch that. I really wanted to play a part in this fight for workplace equity for all. And that's where the mentor method started. I created this when I was a manager at PwC for my team of 40 individuals, just to see how we could match people. Because oftentimes when I participated in corporate mentorship programs, I would be matched to the only other woman, person of color, any other way besides being a top performer and being somebody that should be in those rooms and promoted. And I knew that that wasn't the way to actually see more workplace equity and see that pipeline become more diverse. So that's why I started the mentor method and excited that it's working.
Wonderful. I'd like to go back to Talis on this question, being that you do work with a lot of organizations and companies within your platform. Are there any specific issues or causes that are standing out to you the most, that you're seeing a common thread that people are trying to move towards action with?
That's a great question. Let's see. Something that I've noticed, especially this year, which hopefully to do justice to the fact that I didn't really answer your first question, but and it is a thread across them. I've noticed a lot of youth movements this year who normally mobilize youth as volunteers to either raise money or be mentors to high school students or work in food recovery pantries and deliver food in different forms. All of these organizations, I think all of a sudden this year find themselves with young people who can't necessarily meet as often to do work in person as normally they would. And with all of the changes with schooling and, you know, everybody needing to be more remote and online, there's been this change in movement builders needing to be more of a space to help young people process what's going on in every way. It's been an intense year, and you know, it's been interesting to see just how quickly programs change and adapt to meet the needs of their members, and even still, right, to continue adapting to new ways of gathering online in ways that they didn't necessarily used to in the past. I think that's been very interesting. And another interesting trend I've noticed is organizations who might have found themselves with lower budgets this year, finding creative ways to continue their work by merging. For example, I know of a couple of organizations who were able to continue their communities by merging with one another and sharing resources and kind of being more efficient in that regard, but still being able to work towards, aligned missions together.
That was perfect, and actually leading into the next question that I want to throw back to Paulette on this one, and then open this up to all the panelists at that point. How do you define a movement, and how does advocacy become a movement?
I think defining a movement could definitely be hard, because people think movements have to be this really large scale thing that happens. And I think a movement could be just one person, just you taking some time to realize that, there's some changes that you want to do within yourself that then kind of creates this ripple effect, that then creates this wave. And so I think I can kind of see like Measure being this movement for making data a tool for community members to be able to advocate and take on the process of eliminating a lot of the systemic injustices and inequities that systems have. And I think advocacy plays a role in this, because it helps one to bring awareness to the issues that people are facing and experiencing. Part of what we do is to make sure that the lived experiences are elevated. I think oftentimes that quantitative data is seen as like the gold standard, but we want to challenge that and be able to bring about the lived experiences that people are having, what the day-to-day actually looks like for someone being impacted negatively by these systems. And then I think from that, there comes this action that needs to happen. And the relationship building too is an important part of a movement, that the people get to empathize with one another. And that's ties into allyship too, even if you're not experiencing these negative outcomes, to be able to empathize with one another, just part of this human experience. To be able to connect on that level, and then taking a plan of action. And that definitely looks very different for each issue. But I think those are like the bare bone components of what a movement looks like.
I think that was great what you said too, that it doesn't have to be this huge thing of millions of people coming together for a certain issue or a cause. It could be just one person speaking up or speaking out. And I'd like to throw that over to Janice actually next, because I have seen, and we've all seen now, the common buzzword of allyship, people that may not have come from that lived or shared experience, wanting to really advocate for those that have, and figure out ways that they can really support in a genuine and true way. So Janice, how would you define a movement in your space? And is there anything that's specifically standing out to you on the movements that are taking place within allyship?
That is a great question, and I'm glad that Eugene asked that during this panel. I agree with everything that Paulette was saying in terms of a movement doesn't have to be thousands of people. There doesn't need to be a heightened level of emotions. It's really what you can do in that moment to create that tidal wave of change, right? So let's say, for example, with the mentor method, let's say that there is a straight white male who mentors a young woman of color through our guided system. They don't look like each other, but there's that chemistry there, right? So through making that match, that person in the majority is able to see themselves in that individual. And it's not something that you can see just based on paper, right? Like, it's something that unless you really humble yourself and have those interactions, you won't know how to be a better ally. But then through that corporate mentorship, through that corporate allyship, those teachings that that individual gets from interacting with that professional then translates into their day-to-day. You're able to see that sort of movement and that mentality shift to allyship and looking at, okay, Jane Doe was experiencing systemic bias or microaggressions in these meetings. I never thought of that. But now I'm seeing it when I go to HEB and I'm talking to the cashier, or I see it in the way in which, my daughter on her school project is being asked to be, part of the marketing team versus the science and research side. They'll start seeing these inequities in other areas of their lives in several communities, and they'll be empowered to speak up and be an ally outside of where they're being employed. So to me, that's a movement, especially as a first-generation American who's here speaking to all of you because of random acts of allyship from people who were kind to my parents and mentored them upon their immigration journey. It's really important that people recognize that it's not just the person who's receiving that mentorship and allyship, it's the person giving it, and then how that extends to their families and communities. And that starts the movement more so than just people sort of getting together and discussing the problem.
And before we move on to Talis, I have a question from the audience to Janice.
Oh,
What's
sure.
required to be an effective mentor?
That's a great question, Kristen. I appreciate you asking. A level of humility, empathy, seeking to understand, also understanding your own career path and journey, and being humble enough to actually share those experiences, wanting to say, you know, here is the landscape that I explored. These are the landmines that I stepped on. Let me show you the number of steps you need to take so that you can avoid those. Also, making sure that you're not trying to fit this person into a mold and make them a miniature version of yourself, right? Everybody is different. Even if there is that chemistry and that simpatico alignment, recognizing that each person's journey will be unique to them. So making sure that you're really understanding, hearing their journey and applying the teachings and the lessons that you've experienced and the things that you've learned to their specific journey to make them as successful as possible.
Great answer. Thank you so much. Talis, is there anything you'd like to add on what you believe a movement to be?
Sure, just I guess I'll add, there's this guy whose name is Paul Hawken, and he wrote a book called Blessed Unrest. And a few years ago, I came by a video that he wrote, and he was basically just describing, I think just as Janice and Paulette, you both kind of describe this like individual drive to make a contribution, and that is a movement. Basically, he's saying that is happening everywhere around the world, and we're living in a period in history where we are all a part of this global movement to help see and bring forth a world that works for all humans, for all life. And I think, yeah, that's just like a shared heartbeat that we are all experiencing. And yeah, it's just a beautiful thing, I think, to see ourselves and recognize ourselves as movement builders, from the relationships that we're a part of to the groups that we help build action with. And then I think to take that realization that it's not just us, it's happening everywhere. I think to me that's really inspiring and powerful, and in the sense that, you know, we're all trying to move the needle forward into a more equitable and loving planet.
And so I'd like to ask this question to you, Talis, based on the platform that you have with Crew 2030. One of our audience members asked, where do any of the organization's programs or pursuits cross over with environmental justice endeavors? Do any of the organizations in your portfolio have an environmental justice lens?
Yeah, for sure. There's a few organizations that are doing, I guess I would consider food recovery part of an environmental justice movement, in that, right, we're taking food out of landfills and repurposing and then turning that into a social justice. It responds by making food available to more communities in our cities. And there's a few other organizations that raise money for groups that are doing environmental work in Brazil, Costa Rica, and in different parts of Africa. It's, yeah, very inspiring groups for sure.
Great. And so, as we know, 2020 has just been a trying year in all aspects: mental health, racial, social injustices, all of the things that we've been hearing time and time again on the webinars that have been taking place and within, you know, our circles of influences. And I would like to ask you guys, just individually, what stands out most to you about the nation as a whole responding to this pandemic, racial and social turmoil? What are some of the themes that you're seeing most stand out, or even what's motivating you to keep doing this work when we know that doing this on boots on the ground, grassroots work can be so draining sometimes. So I'd like to throw that over to Paulette.
Yeah, so definitely a couple things that stand out to me. One of the positive things that I think I've noticed is just that self-awareness of how we've internalized a lot of these systems. Whether I think it's virtually or nearly impossible to not have be impacted mentally or just your outlook on life in some way because of our the racial structure of our society. And so that awakening that I see within a lot of people, and some people that I think there's some people who have been aware all along, but that awakening is definitely something that is really promising. I think just because it definitely helps to move us in the right direction, beginning with that awareness. Without that awareness, I think we will continue to sit in the dark and think that everything's okay, we're integrated, and so everything's all good. But really that awakening, I think is really key and good to see. As far as the responses, I'll share an example of just like how I think we still have to be very vigilant about how things are done. For example, I'll give when the pandemic first came out, who had access to testing? It was people who were who had traveled abroad. That was like the initial kind of criteria. And when you think about it, the people mostly who have access to travel abroad are people who probably are more affluent. And so all of the other people who may not have the same level of affluence, but have come in contact with them, did not have that same access to testing. And these are our leaders and public health officials who have not been able to take that equity lens in everything that they do. And if we think about how it has played out with the disparities, I think that initial approach has a huge has a huge tie to how a lot of these disparities are playing out. So it really has definitely like lit up a fire in me to be very vigilant about how we take approaches and how policies are put in place, and being able to really be critical about things.
What about yourself, Janice?
Yeah, 2020's been, we all know what 2020 has been, so I don't need to answer that part. But for us, especially as we are continuing to build and scale out the mentor method, it's been a big year for us. We've been preaching about this inclusion movement from a mountaintop for the last 4 years, right? And when we first launched our enterprise platform in 2017, we often heard that heads of DEI and corporate inclusion didn't have budgets. So for example, there's a corporation that was making $1 billion in annual recurring revenue, but their head of DEI had a budget of $110,000 a year for all initiatives. So wanting to bring in a solution like the mentor method or any type of solution became a problem because they really didn't have a lot to work with. And they weren't being brought into rooms and conversations on how diversity, equity, and inclusion plays a part in the overall health and sustainability of the businesses in which they're involved in. So it's great to see this shift from, DEI leaders being figureheads to now being empowered with the connection to, profit and loss and budgets being allocated, and corporations recognizing that it's not enough to just do lip service. It's really the best thing for the business. I think a part of that comes from historically excluded and underrepresented professionals feeling empowered to say enough is enough. These are the things that we're looking for. And also making sure that the majority stakeholders, so non-diverse counterparts and allies, are now being held accountable for carrying the majority of the work to make these corporations more inclusive and to make sure that there's substantial allyship within these corporations. And I think that shift from making it a problem for the historically excluded to now making this something that The majority is responsible for helping execute and being a collaboration partner, and really using their voice and opportunity to support that has made a world of a difference, not just for the mentor method, but those that we seek to serve through making sure that workplaces are more inclusive.
How about you, Talis?
Yeah, I think for Crew this year, in a way, the work has been very just practical in terms of the responses to seeing, in the middle, especially at the very beginning of the pandemic, seeing a lot of new communities that we hadn't served in the past, like accelerators, for example, who used to meet in person and used to facilitate programs in person, needing to do so online. So I think we've just spent a lot of our year, for one, responding to new kinds of programs, serving new needs to facilitate this new online model. And then for a lot of our existing organizations, we've spent also a lot of time with program redesign meetings. How should each of the organizations we're serving redesign their engagement touch points with their communities, even their responses of the different kinds of programming that they have available. And I think for one, and as we move through this year, and even in general, right, like moving into this new decade of, I think, more and more evident need for transformation in our institutions at every level, our political institutions, educational institutions, everything, right, needs creativity and transformation energy put in towards into that. And I think for us and for me, the one thing that remains unchangeable is the need for grassroots community-based organizations to help take care of one another as we sort things out, as we're going to sort out major changes that need to occur at, like I say, in every level. Communities are just, our safety net, our immediate safety net. And I think continuing to invest in grassroots organizations in every issue and continuing to support our community-based programs feels like one true bet. It can't go wrong.
I think one other thing that's important to address too, like Janice spoke about, we know the power of the pivot that had to take place with 2020, that's now holding webinars and meetings in our own homes, all the different things that have taken place. It's figuring out new ways to connect with our friends, family, and coworkers. And I would really just say, in regards to that, what is one way that your specific organization or company has had to make a pivot in a way that you would not have if it was not COVID? Like, what is something that really stood out to you as a whole? It could be something good or bad. We know sometimes change is not always great, and sometimes change can be a good thing. So I'd like to ask you, Paulette, is there any way that you have had to pivot with measure and seen a positive or an outcome that you could work on towards 2021?
Oh yeah, pivoting, has definitely been instrumental for us. One of the biggest things, or one of our biggest foundational pillars, is community engagement. Like, we cannot do this work without the community. Everything that we do is community led. And so finding those, we no longer had those in-person meetings and the spaces to gather as community, to have our discussions, our community data gatherings. And so being able to shift that to a virtual platform was definitely a pivot that we had to make. And I'm sure everyone else can attest to it as well, having to pivot to virtual platforms. The part too that always is on our forefront is being mindful of people who don't have access to technology, and how do we reach them, whether it's being able to do phone calls instead, or making sure that they have access to that phone line so they are also able to join. So always being mindful too of just the different access levels and how we can be inclusive of our community members, and making sure that everyone has an opportunity to participate.
Yeah, I think community is so important just in all the work that we do, essentially in finding new ways to keep each other engaged and really hone in on the person at this time. And I see that trend continuing in 2021. So thank you for that, Paulette. What about yourself, Talis, with Crew 2030, which is a platform already to begin with? What are some ways that you have been pivoting or even maybe ramping up with all the organizations that now have to move into the virtual space?
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the new features that we found ourselves needing to build into this year has been ability for the organizations who we serve. They most often had summer training, summer camps, gatherings in person, multi-day type of events, and we've developed a series of functionality that allows multi-day live events hosting on the platform, just to make it easy if your members are already on a platform to keep them there, right? Like continuing to add functionality that meets the needs of this year and beyond. So that was a really straightforward one that we applied for a grant for, and thank goodness found some funds to invest in as a community into that direction.
Thank you. And I know, Janice, you already mentioned that this has been a growth opportunity for those wanting to get into the DEI space, but is there anything you'd like to add on the power of the pivot, essentially?
Absolutely. You know, when March hit and it seemed as though the world just took a, monumental turn, right? I anticipated an increase in isolation with everybody working from home. There's no longer, water cooler talk and things like that. You're not able to connect with people based on, whose desk is next to yours and things. But also recognizing, having worked from home for the last about 10 years now, I know that the work somehow doesn't end. There's so much more on your to-do list when you work from home. So I anticipated those shifting to this virtual workforce for the first time would feel a heightened sense of overwhelm, getting adjusted to this global pandemic that we are all, aware of and sort of going through together. So because of that, we focused more on building these pods, virtual pods within the Mentor Method software. Like I said before, we've been shouting from the mountaintop the importance of virtual connection and virtual mentorship. So that wasn't a major pivot for us. But we did include a new type of mentorship called a family tree model, where groups of 10 to 12 professionals within a corporation would be matched, and they could form these working groups so that you know that you're in a safe space and you're working with people who understand you. There's still that chemistry based matching so that you know that you're with people that have a similar alignment, but it's not just say a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 ratio. It's really helping you build a sub community within your corporation so that you still feel as though you have some level of companionship. So that's been a major update. Given our work though, we are in the corporate inclusion space. So we work with the nonprofit around the corner, and we work with the larger social media companies and management consulting firms, as I mentioned before. But for me personally, I didn't feel like that was enough. We weren't going to build an entirely new business, but I did want to make sure that, with the time that I had, I was dedicating as much as I could to serve in this social justice movement, exponentially more than, what we're doing with the Mentor Method. So outside of, growing the corporation and continuing that global impact that we've seen through inclusive mentorship, I've also made sure to carve out the time to serve on nonprofit boards that are, in alignment to the areas that matter to me that the Mentor Method simply cannot focus on, such as social justice or social justice reform, and in those areas. So it's been very rewarding to play on both sides, the corporate as well as the individual impact.
And as mentioned previously in the definition of action, we know that sometimes this has to continue over and over again and have repetition, right? So for 2021, what are some of the most critical changes that we must face to make the future more effective and more just a happier place for everyone together? And how can we just continue the positive momentum that has taken place? We know that this is a wave of change for everyone, no matter what space they're in. How would you, what word of advice would you have for someone wanting to get into this work in 2021 or continuing the movement?
I can start. I think the best piece of advice, and this is a great wrap-up question, Maria, thank you, is recognize that 2020 was tough, but we still have a long way to go. You know, especially for our allies, thank you for your contributions. Thank you for joining the fight for equity for all. And just remember that 2020 was just a fraction of a snapshot of what historically excluded professionals and historically excluded people feel on a daily basis from like the time that they were born, right? This has been hundreds of years in the making. And so empathize with the overwhelm, the burnout, you know, the things that you're seeing from an inequity standpoint, and recognize that these are things that, you know, the women on this panel have experienced daily in some situations, and that others that are not on this panel, that are in your community or on your team in a corporate structure, are experiencing and still showing up to work without actually having those conversations. So we still have to roll up our sleeves and get to work and just really empathize with how long this journey is, because we can't, even if we're tired, we still have to keep going.
How about you, Paulette?
Yeah, I would definitely piggyback off of what Janice said, that this is definitely a marathon, and I don't. Yeah, it's gonna be it's definitely gonna be a long road. This system wasn't built overnight, and it's not gonna come apart overnight as well. So one, that's definitely the mindset to frame yourselves in, that this is something to commit yourself to for the long haul, and just thoughts on actions that can be taken. I think oftentimes there's that idea that, you know, well, I don't have the money, so I can't do anything. So definitely challenging people to be creative. I've seen some amazing, amazing avenues that organizations have taken to support nonprofits that are doing grassroots work and really supporting the needs of the communities and tackling racial injustice. They've done things like provide grant writers where they can't, you know, provide funding. They can send grant writers. They've done things like make connections. There's so many different ways that, you know, you can be a part of it and help out. So challenge yourself to think about the needs of organizations and build those relationships and ask. I think asking is definitely the first step to understanding how you can help. There are different needs for different organizations. And so being able to ask them what they need and helping in some way to provide that. So.
Yeah, ditto those. I love y'all's responses and take them to heart myself and agree. I think it's going to be a decade of changes and hopefully continuing the transformation that we're starting to see, and yeah, just the awakening in every way that this year has made evident for us. I think besides what Paulette and Janice said, I think this year also, you know, like you're saying, we're all at home in our children's bedroom and, you know, finding those boundaries between our kids and our loved ones and work and our communities. And I think hopefully this is also a year where we reground our lives, you know, reground our relationships and our priorities and our ability to respond creatively to being in relationship, right? Like the being in relationship with our immediate people in our households and our neighbors and our cities. I think yeah, we're just called to be a part of a generation of redesign and creative response. So I think yeah, no matter our circumstance and where we are, there's still a way to answer that what's needed question, and there's always still something we can contribute from volunteering to just being in relationship. I think yeah, sorry, I'll end there. Rambling.
Well, I just want Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists and the work you all are doing in the community and just being wonderful human beings to begin with, as I know you all. Personally, I would like to say if you want to stay connected, which I'm sure everyone does with all this insight that took place here on the panel, you can reach Paulette at www.measureaustin.org, Janice, crew2030.org, and Talis at the, excuse backwards, Talis at crew2030.org, and Janice at thementormethod.com. We did have, okay, Talis, thank you. Someone was wanting to connect with you and needed your information. All of this connection taking place in the virtual space. I love it. This recording will be sent out on social media and a follow-up email as well. There will also be a small survey or brief survey that we'd like you to take, which will help guide us in the direction for 2021 programming. That's so important to us to make sure that we have discussions that are important to you. So again, thank you so much for spending your Tuesday afternoon with us and really taking action in this space. And remember, you can take action in any cause or issue that's important to you. It's just putting one foot forward. So thank you again, panelists. You all are wonderful. And if you need anything from the Entrepreneurs Foundation or more information from Culturati, feel free to email Sophia or myself, Maria at efctx.org, and Sophia at efctx.org. And again, we know this is the virtual space. No one's going to remember that probably, but again, feel free to contact us on email or social media. We'd love to hear from you all. So take care and enjoy the rest of your week.